Hi, everyone. I'm Meryl Konofsky. I am an attorney here at HUD in the Office of General Counsel. Thank you for joining us for today's Section 508 training on drafting alternative text. We're very lucky to have Gary Morin here joining us from the National Institutes of Health. He is a program analyst there in their Office of the Chief Information Officer, and he is their subject matter expert on Section 508 and compliance with Section 508 under the Rehabilitation Act. And so I'm going to turn it over to him so we're not wasting too much time with introductions. I'm sure he'll tell you more about himself as he starts up. Gary.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Have a seat. There is licorice. I always feel bad. I'm a little bit always nervous that I'm not good enough, that I'm going to have one of those Sally Field moments of, they like me, they really like me, and I really do know what I'm doing. We've got a lot of slides this afternoon. We're not going to get through them all, but hopefully you'll all get a copy of the PowerPoint file afterwards. And a lot of the material is linked. There's a lot of links embedded in the slides as well as in the note fields. I know when we have meetings back at the NIH, we tend to redact everything out of the notes fields. That's right. And I don't know how to not walk around, so I'm going to work on that today. Welcome to everyone who's both in person and watching the webcast. As Meryl said, I work at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. I joined there as a sign language interpreter with a 5-year plan. That was in 1993. I didn't have a plan beyond those 5 years, but I worked as an interpreter and then interpreter coordinator, and I also traveled around the country doing training for healthcare interpreters. I'm great in some sections of interpreting between American Sign Language and English. Healthcare and medical was one of those specialties of mine. Interpreting accounting, interpreting genetics, not so good. Science, but I'm great with medicine, and that's what I really enjoyed doing for many years. In the late 90s, as Section 508 was coming into play and planning to go into effect in 2001, I transitioned over to a program analyst specializing in disability access, and have been focused on Section 508 ever since then. There's a seat here up in the front. I'll move my coat out of the way. And have been working on accessibility. We're not so big on compliance. The NIH doesn't like to force its divisions to do anything. And so we take a much more encouraging approach. Oh, okay, excellent. A walk around mic, which always serves as a great tie clip on those rare occasions I wear a tie. So for the last 18, 19 years, I've been working on encouraging employees across the NIH and some other federal agencies to really just look at opportunities for accessibility. That whether or not we have to comply with the law, we do, and the law does state that regardless of demographics, of census, just whether we have a lot of employees with disabilities or no employees with disabilities, 508 is a mandate. It's something we have to implement. It's not funded with a special separate budget, but it is funded in that it should become a part of how you do your daily work. Whenever you create a PowerPoint file, a document, a Word file, create content for the websites, for PDF files that'll be distributed. 508 should just be part of that practice of how you make your content accessible content, that it's just part of how you do your daily work. We're going to spend time going over a lot of examples. We're not going to go in and out of the web too much. There are a couple slides we'll look at, or a couple websites we'll look at. And I'll explain one of the benefits of using a particular browser, which you may or may not have on your laptops or your computers, but you can ask for it to be installed. So before we start, and we've got a microphone here in the room, and we do need to use the microphone for the benefit of anybody who's listening in so that they can hear our questions. If you do have a question, if it's urgent to or applicable to what we're talking about at the moment, by all means jump in. Otherwise, jot it down, pass it forward, or ask afterwards. We'll make sure to have time for questions. We'll try to take about a 5-10 minute break right around 2 o'clock. I once was going on for hours out in Kentucky, and they had to stop me after 2 or 3 hours and said, we don't know how you do things back in the East, but we take breaks. I lived in New York just for 2 years of my life, but I can talk nonstop. So you have to stop me every so often, get me to pause. As a former sign language interpreter, I'm a real killer on other interpreters. I can just keep going. And hopefully that's my excitement over the material, because I really do get excited over seeing quality accessibility, that it's not just about complying with the law, but it's about making our material, our digital content, accessible to people who otherwise would not benefit from it. It's about looking at opportunities. Whether we're trying to describe the Weaver building, and let's just start off with an icebreaker. How would you describe the building that we're in? Now, I was excited to find out that it was a Bauhaus influenced design building, architectural building. I've heard various descriptions of it. How would you describe the building to somebody who couldn't see it? I'm sorry?
That's like it's shaped like a horseshoe.
So it's in a horseshoe.
It's a horseshoe shape.
That's right. I started to notice that as I came off and tried to find the entrance to the visitor entrance.
I would say
Horseshoe-shaped?
like a dog bone.
A dog bone. So it's long and bigger at the ends. What would be, right now, I think the website just says the Weaver Building, or the Robert C. Weaver Federal Building, or HUD headquarters. But if you were to describe it beyond just the name of the building, and I realized I forgot to go back and figure out who Robert C. Weaver is, but that might be of interest. What would be a one-sentence or two-sentence description of the building that you would convey in an alternative text? And a dog bone or horseshoe-shaped building that concrete, attractive, modern, what did I just hear? Ugly. One description that I did find for it is brutalist beauty or 10 floors of basement from an architectural review journal. So a fairly sparse gray concrete building on platforms, hard to describe and how do we describe with enough adjectives but we're not being judgmental or conveying our judgment and letting somebody else figure it out for themselves? I know a couple weeks ago in the Introduction to 508 class that Billy taught, there was a video clip of an audio description example for those of that who were here, and it had The Lion King. Great little video clip. Audio descriptions are for videos to convey the visual images of what a blind person would otherwise miss. And there are two thoughts on that, and I think it applies to alternative text as well. Should we be telling the person just factually, what are the facts, versus conveying a sense of judgment or pleasure or distaste? Do we want to influence, how do we inform a blind person without influencing them? I might say that it's a really ugly building. Somebody else might find it an attractive building. I've never actually seen the whole film, but if anyone's familiar with the film Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts, she comes down to the bar in a red dress. The American version, that's audio described for the blind, describes it as a low-cut red dress off the shoulder. The British version refers to it as slinky, dishy, which is, I guess, a euphemism for attractive, and a couple other qualified descriptions. So I would take more of an American approach on this, where we're just providing the information. This is what I see. What you interpret is up to you. It's a 10-story cement building that every floor is the same. Somebody might think, oh, that's attractive, or, oh, it sounds really boring. But it leaves it to the discretion of the viewer, the end user. What I hope in this afternoon is that you'll take, I don't know where I got this quote, I don't think it's my own, ask and be dumb for a moment, don't ask and be dumb for a lifetime. There is no question that's bad. I really am open to any discussion. I hope to just challenge you on how do we convey information, whether it's a table, a chart, a group of people, a picture of the secretary. We have a picture of the secretary being sworn in. I disagree with the alt text, but the web manager of that site may be here in the room and tell me why they did this. And I say, okay, well it's all about the context and what the owner of that website wants to convey. Alternative text is really a way for us just to describe the information to make sure that people who are blind or visually disabled, vision impaired, partially sighted, and also people who may be sighted but have a reading disability and use a screen reader to help them read along, listening to it as well as reading it visually. We want to make sure that all of the information is available. Some of the information is available as straight text on the screen, and then others in images. So alternative text is one form of access for people who are blind, low vision, partially sighted, just as we have captions, and the webcast is being captioned today. One might look at your organizational chart. That's always a good place to start because every agency has lots of org charts, both at the agency level and then all the way down through division levels. In some cases, it may simply be if you've got a PDF file of an org chart and it's just boxes and names, unless the purpose is simply to say, here, our organization is really complicated, but it's actually to give information. These are the 26 institutes and divisions of the NIH. These are the 25 divisions of HUD. I simply recommend using text alternative, just putting a text equivalent below the image. Either the image or the PDF might link to a text page, or it might say, see text below, but really just starting off with the org charts that we all have as one example. Copy and paste. I just copy and pasted this from someplace else on your website, and I would just attach that to an organizational chart. But before I go any further, I want to find out what are your priorities? And maybe with the microphone we can go around. I don't know if we have input from those online in any way. No. What brought you here today? A couple hours out of your office.
I'm working on a newsletter for our organization. We have pictures, we have graphics, and I need to know how to make it 508 compliant.
And are you the content owner? Will you be the person who gets to decide what the alternative text is? Or are you the technical person who's putting the newsletter together and following somebody else, the editor's direction?
I'm preparing the newsletter for approval, and most likely I'll be preparing the alt text for approval by our director, but
Great.
basically the editor of the document.
Good. And the reason I asked that question is a webmaster or a support staff or desktop professional, desktop publishing professional may have the responsibility to make sure the alternative text is there. But they may or may not be the content owner expert to say, well, this is what the alternative text should be. I'm putting this image, at work, back at the NIH, I could put an alt text into any kind of science image. It won't be right, it won't be meaningful or meaningfully equivalent. So we need to know whose responsibility is what. So you have the responsibility and the prerogative to decide this is the image I'm choosing and this is the message I want to convey. So that's really a key and prime position, I think. Anyone else?
Last year, I had a problem getting a table put on the web that I've put on the web for, I don't know, 8 years or something. And the compliance was not, it was not 508 compliant. There were too many spaces or something. And it wasn't, and I work with a contractor to put it on. I provide the content of the table. And we ended up having to totally change the way we did the table and put it into a different software. And it was just a big issue, so it'd be nice to know about these things sort of ahead of time.
Right.
And
some of
especially when the contractor was not as much help as I would have hoped.
Right. And some of it is software based, if you're using Publisher or Adobe X, Y, and Z. And that may be beyond the scope of this afternoon, but we can certainly follow up and discuss it. My main goal is to talk about actually the content. How do we describe the images, the charts, the graphs, and debate the meaningfulness of your proposed text. Anything within Microsoft Office I can certainly help with. Yes?
I'm actually a desktop publisher. I work in graphics, and sometimes we get requests to make documents 508 compliant. So sometimes it's good to be here to explain, because I'm not the owner of the content
Right.
usually. I'm just putting the content together. So to inform the client about providing alternate text, and that's why I'm basically, and to see what type of software, because I'll use Acrobat Pro. We basically use InDesign, but some people might use Microsoft Word. So
Right.
I'm just here to kind of get a feel for what direction and how to explain to people who come to me, like, what they may need to do.
Right. That's the thing, is really developing that relationship with, modeling it based on those in the room, is that relationship you build up with the content owners or with the desktop professionals, so that if you, for instance, if you get 5 images and a set of articles, you've got to know not only just which images go with which article, but what is the alternative text that the content owner wants embedded, because that's not your job. Your job is to make sure it's there, but you could make a decision, you're as bright as anyone else in the room, it may not convey what the owner wants. And so anytime you get an image, you should get a set of bullets or emails. Here's the 5 images, here's 5 bullets that have 2 sentences apiece. Picture 1 gets alt text 1, picture 2 gets alt text 2, and it's about, I can't proceed until I get that from you, whoever you are that you're negotiating with. And it's about 508, at least I think this is true across the government, 508 comes after cost. Let me put that, step back, fix that a minute. 508 comes before cost and finances, but it never comes before business need. So your business drives the accessibility. It's never about making the content that you're preparing lower, about lessening the quality or the integrity of the information. It's about making it available to a wider audience. The NIH, I use the example, if it takes an MD, PhD to understand the content, the image, then the blind person has to have an MD, PhD. It's about making our audience wider, but never lower or less than. If I stumble on a scientific image or on a graph, a financial chart from HUD, and I don't understand it, well, if I'm not part of your target audience, I have no business to complain. I might stumble on it on your website, but I'm not there as your target audience. You're trying to reach accountants or developers or project managers. So I think it's really important to develop and cull that relationship with the person who you're responsible to, that you're answering to develop that newsletter. Is, well, what are you trying to convey? And maybe it's a conversation, and they may have just put that image in there for decoration, or it's relevant, but it's not specific. You could swap any picture of any building. Why this building? Oh, well, it's not about that building, it's about buildings in general. Well, that's going to drive what your alternative text is, but it makes the content owner stop and think, why am I putting that picture in there? If they're on if the end user is on a dial-up connection or on a cell phone they've turned their images off, or I'm describing it over the telephone to somebody, how would I describe? Oh, it's a picture of a 2-story building versus this building has unique qualities. That's what I'm trying to convey. So it's all about building that relationship. What else? What brings you here, and what are your burning questions? Or lukewarm questions? Over here.
Hi, my name is Durga and she is Madhavi. We both are representing IT department, IT specialist we are. We do web applications which we have a responsibility to have while developing and testing the applications, whether those are 508 compliant or not.
Are there images within the applications?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Are they predetermined images, or are they data that's dynamic images?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, hopefully we can address both of those. At the end of the afternoon, at least, you may not have the answer, but I want you to at least feel comfortable asking questions about any image that you see on a website, on a government website, on your own website, in your own PDF files and newsletters. Is the description good enough? Is it better than good enough? And is it even better than that? Is it equivalent? Is the blind person or the sight-impaired person or the cognitively impaired, the reading impaired disabled individual going to get the same message as anybody else? Let's see. We have to do it. The numbers are simply there. It's the law is there. The population is big. Whether we look at those numbers or these numbers, every agency seems to have different numbers of people with disabilities. The numbers are big enough. We want to make sure that everybody has equal access, and it is really about equality and equal access. Section 508 is a part of the Rehabilitation Act, which is a civil rights law, so it's about inclusion. And it's about our being good, responsible federal employees to the American population and to our own employees who may be disabled. So alternative text, well, 508 covers all of these disabilities. The ones impacted specifically by alternative text or the lack of alternative text would be somebody who's blind, low vision, and also colorblind. So we want to make sure that the images we choose have good color choices, that somebody who's colorblind will be able to tell the difference. And also, which I didn't include necessarily, is contrast. And there are, I think in the bibliography that I've provided, and that we'll make sure you get as a follow-up, there are a set of links to websites where you can test the colors and color contrast on your websites or in your documents. You can upload an image and find out, is the contrast strong enough? Particularly if you have text within the image. Want to make sure that somebody who's vision impaired will be able to distinguish the text from the color background. We have images all over the place. I think you've mentioned several of them already. Microsoft Office, we've got Excel, PowerPoint, Word, desktop publishing, and PDF files. I found lots of PDF files on your website. Yes, in the back.
If you're creating like an alt text for an org chart, should it convey hierarchy or should it just simply list out all the offices and sub-offices?
What I tend, this is my opinion, take it for what it's worth. Hopefully it's based on experience. And then you've got to figure out how big is the org chart? How complicated is it? I tend to convert org charts into numerical bullets, level 1, A, B, C, D, level 2, A, B, C, to show the structure and the power relationship and the organizational and management relationship. Now, it's going to depend on, and you may have one org chart that's used in different contexts. So it might just be on your homepage of the organization, Dr. John Doe is the director, and he's got 10 subordinate divisions. Or it's going to be where you list out everybody. How long can an alt text be? In a Word file, in a PowerPoint? Do you have a rule? Or what is your rule of thumb? I've heard 99 characters, I've heard 100 characters, I've heard 165. My basic premise on all of this, whether it's an org chart or a group of people or buildings, is as long as necessary and as short as possible. 2 to 3 sentences. So tell me the question again. Yeah, or the example.
If you're creating an org chart, I mean, if you're creating like alternative text for an org chart, would it be in a hierarchical structure, or would you just list everything on that? Because I'm sighted, so naturally,
Right.
I know what to look at, but I'm not for an example for like someone who's visually impaired. I don't really understand how they would like view it or how the screen reader views it. So
Right.
I don't know like the best way to do that for them.
And I think you raise a really important point, which is at the end of the day, and apparently that's one of the most overused phrases, according to some list, I'm sighted. At the end of the day, I'm not blind. I don't have that lived experience. So I can only do my best and make sure that every website or every PDF file has a disclaimer. If you're a person with a disability and need further assistance, please contact so-and-so, and have an email address or a phone number to show that, yes, I've done my best, and I know I'm legally obligated, and I'm trying to do more than just good enough. But I also don't know what the individual, because you may get one individual who says, oh, well, I was sighted, I lost my vision, and understand org charts, and somebody else who's never seen them before in their life. Either they're fresh out of school or they grew up blind, fresh out of school and vision impaired and not experienced org charts. So you can only do your best. Do what you think makes sense. Toss it around with a colleague or two. Spend a reasonable amount of time. We've all got only 8 hours a day, or whatever our shift is. If the purpose of the org chart is to show the hierarchy, then that's what I want to convey in the alt text. This is a 10-layer organizational chart that has 15 divisions, each with 5 subdivisions. Click here for the details. Alt text can absolutely be a way to cheat, and not cheat, but to convey that extra instruction. Click here for more details. In a PowerPoint file where I've got images, I'll also put See Notes field, because a screen reader can access the PowerPoint notes field. So I may just put, the take-home message of the chart is, we spent $10 million on 90 programs last year. See below for how that money was spent. What is your take-home message? So is it to show the hierarchy and to show where perhaps we're in the middle of this hierarchy, or this is the head office with the 10 subdivisions? Or it's simply, this is a very complicated organization, see the link for the actual details. Give it your best shot, toss it around with somebody, leave it overnight, and then come back to it. I can provide upon a request, we've got instructions on how to do the alt text for the different social media, but suffice it to say at the moment that social media, just because we don't own it, isn't exempt from 508. We still have to make sure that the images are all described, videos are captioned, videos are audio described. It does still need to be accessible, it's just the way you do it might be different. In many of those, you can actually go in and add alt text. For many years, we couldn't. You couldn't interact with the coding of Facebook or Flickr. There are ways to simply post content below it. Yes?
You can on Instagram now.
Yes. I think all of these you now can. Oh, except for Flickr. But Flickr has an option below the image to just put in a description. And that's where you would put your alternative text. It functions as alt text. It's just a description of the image. So yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and what was the one that you just?
Instagram.
Instagram. And that's the one that I don't use, I've never used. I don't know anything about Instagram. So alt text serves as a substitute for the content. It serves, and we have to keep in mind both, there are people who are at the extreme of no sight, and then there's people all across the spectrum who are reading, looking at the image, and listening to the alternative text. People who have vision loss of any degree, who may be able to see the image but can't make out the details. And that's really where it's even more important to think about what is the alternative text that will complement the picture, that will complement the caption. Everybody sees the caption, unless it's embedded in the picture, and sometimes they are. The alternative text should never be redundant of the caption. Otherwise, that becomes auditory clutter for the blind person who's listening to it. If it's in the caption, then just say in the alt text, if you've got an award ceremony, you've got 10 people receiving an award from the secretary, and the caption already says, from left to right is A, B, C, and D persons. Then the alt text might simply be, Secretary Carson handing out awards to 10 employees. See link below, or see caption for details. Think about how it complements rather than is redundant. So, what is the picture? What's my message? If I took that picture out, i.e. if there is no alt text, what is the reader going to miss? What do they lose from the content? What else is in the surrounding content that maybe already explains the details of the picture? Is the picture just a redundant visual option? You may like both text and visual-based ways of conveying information, and that's okay. So just think, do I need to put in a full alternative text, or maybe it's so redundant that I'm just going to put in a null alt text, which is double quote, so that the screen reader just ignores it. Or maybe I'm going to say, the contents of this article, of this image, are conveyed in paragraph 3. Enough to just divert the reader's attention to where the text already is conveyed. So let's just see how, okay. Let's go. Any questions or points at this? Okay. Mozilla Firefox has this cool feature where if you scroll the mouse over the image, and actually scroll around, it actually popped up for a second. If you move it around, sometimes you can see, it's not working. See, and this is why I use Mozilla as opposed to say Internet Explorer or Edge, because it's not consistent. In Mozilla, if you have it, or Firefox rather, you can right-click over the image and then view image info. That will tell you what the current alternative text is on a website. Just as you can right-click on an image in Word and PowerPoint and go into and edit the alt text there, this is how you can check somebody else's work on a website. And I invite you, as part of your homework, to go back and do that. Use Mozilla if you have, or in any other browser, just scroll over it and tweak the mouse so that it pops up the text. This is how I describe to my mother what I do for work. As I scroll over images on the website, and I see when that text box pops up, that's for blind people. That's what I teach people how to do. I think she's got it after all these years, and I've explained it. So right now, what blind people or sight-impaired individuals are going to hear is, HUD, can you drag this over away from the image? There we go. So a blind person, somebody listening to the page, is going to hear HUD podcast. What they're missing out on is unlocking insights from the nation's leading housers. House Keys. I'm guessing that House Keys is the name of the podcast series. HUD podcast is accurate, but is it equivalent? It's good. It's good enough, maybe. I don't think it's equivalent. And please know that the doors are shut. We're here to discuss and critique. It's not about criticism ever. I want to just raise things and say, well, as an outsider, do you think this is it? Is this good? Could it be better? It's not 0, but it's not 100. How do we move it from wherever it is on that score line closer to 100? How do we just make it better? And that's my goal, and that's hopefully the compassion that I share in saying, let's critique it. Let's rip it apart and put it back together even better. So using Mozilla, we see that the alt text is HUD podcast. Would it be enough to say unlocking insights from the nation's leading housers? Would you want to add more? Would you describe the house? Yes, no? What about the house would you describe? Would you just say in front of a homey looking cottage house? I don't know. What?
I guess is it a two-story?
Looks like a two-story.
Yeah, it looks like a two-story.
Craftsman, maybe?
Craftsman style. Yeah.
Garage in the back,
Yeah,
evening.
garage. Yeah, well landscaped.
So
It
in
looks like a night's vision.
It does look rather
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, like dusk.
And we might want to tie it to this particular episode, all about Section 3, a building block for economic advancement. A starter home, maybe?
Yes.
Although I've seen prices for craftsman houses, and they're not in the starter home range.
Never.
But let's think about what's the context.
Right.
And that's everything about an image. What is the context? A nice, it could be I can't tell if it's urban, rural, suburban. A two-story craftsman house, unlocking insights from the nation's leading housers. Something to make it attractive, because right now it's HUD podcast. That tells me what it is, but it doesn't tell me how it is, or how good it is, or how interesting it's going to be. Doesn't grab me. So always think about what is it that you're going to grab the attention of the individual, the reader. Great. So that's a nice little tool. I think there's a more recent version of Mozilla Firefox that has additional amenities or features that you can use. But this one is just associated text. So let's close that.
Even that title is not actually telling you, unlocking insights. It's not telling you, it's not giving you any information.
It's not. The title right now as it is doesn't tell me much. Yeah.
We're recording it.
So this used to be an example of where the alternative text was CAPTCHA, I think. Now what they've actually gone and done is gotten rid of the CAPTCHA, which was inaccessible, and just done a mathematical equation. CAPTCHAs are notoriously inaccessible. There is a version, that reCAPTCHA, that does have an audio output, very muffled. If you're of a advanced age, and your hearing is not what it once was, and your sight is not what it once was, even the best of those reCAPTCHAs are hard to manage. I guess that's the purpose. This is just as effective, having a mathematical equation. 1 + 1 is blank. Now, because it's numbers, we have to assume that the end user is going to know to put in the number 4 as opposed to the word for, F-O-U-R. And if it was T-W-O or O-1, O-N-E plus T-H-R-E-E, then the person would have to know that it's F-O-U-R. There is actually an example of an alt text for a CAPTCHA, which is permanent. It doesn't actually change. It's not dynamic. The alt text is the answer. I'm not sure if that actually works. It's accessible, but it may defeat the purpose of security by just putting the answer into the alt text, because I'm sure software could go out there and sniff it out. So that's just one example. Let's go back. Great. Okay, jumping right in. If we haven't spent enough time yet, let's jump right in. The first thing I want to give you as a tip, double check your spelling. The alt text fields in PowerPoint and Word and Excel and most programs now will show you that the word is misspelled. There'll be the squiggle line under it in an Office product. Up until the last version, that was not the case. So if you misspelled a word, you wouldn't know. So I always recommended, and this may still be a useful trick or tip, is write your alt text in a Word document or in an email that's going to have the spell check running, so that you can see that it's misspelled and then copy and paste it. Especially if you're the person who's doing the end desktop publishing, you'll get it in an email. You'll see that it's misspelled before you transfer it in. Also, don't do things like, this is an image of, or image of X, Y, and Z. A screen reader will announce that already. When they encounter alt text, it will read to the person using the screen reader, image. So for you to say image of X, Y, and Z, it becomes, again, auditory clutter. It's redundant. Now, if you're trying to convey that it's a graph, a chart, a particular type of image, then by all means. So it's about minimizing your use of the real estate. If I want to keep it as short as possible, what words can I cut out? I can cut out the word image of, because it's already going to be announced by the screen reader. Just jump right in and say, 2 boys playing with darkened outside, an example of what a person with glaucoma would see. There are a number of spelling errors, and that was from, again, when you couldn't tell by in the alt text field. It didn't show up. The blind person or the vision impaired person will hear that, and it'll be disruptive to them listening. Now, I don't know, and because we're sighted, we're not seeing the alt text. It doesn't bother us. We don't realize that it's misspelled as an end user. This is the basis for my encouragement for the homework that you're going to take away from this. It's a great handbook that is online that you can download. Who'd have thought you could have a 60-page book on how to write alt text? But it takes you from very basic images of, portraits all the way up through charts and graphs. We're going to go through, and it's the Digital Image and Graphic Resources for Accessible Materials. It's a handbook, but they've now actually redone the whole website, and it's interactive, and it's actually where you have to fill in the blanks and create your own draft. During the break, we'll pull up that website. So these are all where would you say your images fall? Are they art, chemistry, diagrams, flow charts, maps? It's really science-based. So it's great for us at the NIH and NASA and other similar agencies. The is it the IRS? No, Social Security also has a 60-page handbook on how to do alternative text. But they've got examples that I find really useful in terms of government. They've got pictures of dogs and cats, and it's very good for a general website, but not for government content. All of these links will take you directly to the section of the online handbook version. The keys. Really, this is what it comes down to is, what is the context of the image? Who is your audience? Again, you may use that same organizational chart or the same picture of the secretary or secretary's staff, but in different contexts. Back in the beginning of doing this, I would always say, the same image is always going to have the same alt text. Well, your logo might, the HUD logo, the NIH or HHS logo might always be the same. But pictures are used in different contexts. So if you borrow an image from another article, just because the alt text might carry over, and typically it doesn't, you have to redo the alt text, doesn't mean you should necessarily use the same alt text. You have to think about it. It might be applicable in your article or your publication. It may not be. How much is general and how specific do you want to get? How general do you need to be? And that's really up to you, up to each individual article. That the org chart or the graphics, the tables and the graphs. Is it really important to be very specific down to the dollar level? Or is it simply the trend of our budget has gone from 10 billion to 20 billion over the last 10 years? Maybe that's all you need to convey. Or is it, and this is the ups and downs year by year. What is it that you're conveying? Our budget has steadily gone down. That's all you need to say. Or it's gone down, but it's also shifted from one program to another. I'm trying to think where we get into some of the, okay. So let's start off with this one. Here's what you need to think about. Appearance, action, position, reading. Now, you may not use them all each and every time. This just to get your mind thinking as you look at any image. Any examples? How would you describe this image based on appearance or based on action? Is there any action in the image? And hopefully it's not a man. I want to hear more than just a man is reading a newspaper. We all know who this is. It's John F. Kennedy. Maybe it's a distance. Maybe it's the, oh. Can't tell from this distance? Okay. Just another dude. Okay. Apparently, he's actually reading the classifieds, looking for a house. So it's before he moved to D.C. as a senator. He wasn't president at the time, so it wouldn't be accurate to say even then president or former president. Senator Kennedy, or if you don't know at what time period the image is taken, John F. Kennedy. Because if we add the title, then we're kind of tying him into a time period. And if we want to leave it more generic, just John F. Kennedy reading the newspaper in a relaxed position. I'm sure it was posed. It's got to have been posed. A posed informal picture of John F. Kennedy reading the newspaper in front of the U.S. Capitol. Is it important to indicate that it's black and white? Yes. I think so. Now, by referring to John F. Kennedy, maybe we're already giving that time period, and it can be assumed that it's black and white. I don't know. I was celebrating an early birthday. So I don't know if all photos at that time were in color or still black and white. So, but I might, yeah. A black and white artistic photo of John F. Kennedy reading the paper in front of the U.S. Capitol. He's seated at some building. There are probably any number of buildings where it could have been taken. Probably not relevant. I think the Capitol is what drives it home as to it's a D.C. image. It's the capital of the U.S. Does it matter which way he's looking? He's reading the paper. That describes his viewpoint, the angle. There's nobody else in the picture. We refer to it's not John F. Kennedy and a crowd. It's just John F. Kennedy. So identify the person if you can. What is the general time period? This is a current picture. This is a historical picture. The state of being. Can we tell that he's worried about housing cost? Is he probably somebody who didn't really worry about housing cost in Georgetown, which is where he ended up living, as I recall? So what is it conveying? Or is it the beginning of Camelot in Washington with John F. Kennedy relaxed? Or we just keep it to the facts. A young John F. Kennedy reading the paper, sitting by the US Capitol. A black and white shot with him as the only individual in the picture. A couple buildings. This is a project, I actually did some Googling last week on HUD buildings, and this is a project that apparently failed. It's a synagogue, in fact, that my parents grew up going to down the street from where they lived, or where my mother grew up. The alt text in the Worcester Telegram just has it as HUD building. If it were being used in a report, I think you might want to describe it differently. Knowing that it was funded by the HUD, by Health and Human, Housing and Urban Development, and the project developers failed, you might be including it as an image of as part of the report. What would be an interesting 2 sentences that conveys that building? It's a project by HUD, so that part we know. What about the building? It's red brick. It's a square-shaped building. There appears to be, there's a set of stairs in the front. It is a historical building. Yeah. It was built, I think, in the 30s or 40s. So the main entrance is up a full flight of stairs. A red brick. Now, from the build, it's hard to, again, context. My context is I knew what it was. In a report, well, yes, because it was somebody bought this former house of worship and converted it into condos. If it weren't so cold in Massachusetts, I'd have gone and bought one. But is it important in the article? Or it might already be in the text of the article. The former Sharet Zedek synagogue that was converted into condos. So the alt text may or may not need to be very detailed. So again, whether it's in the article or it's in the alt text. 2-story building, or probably 3 stories, with cars parked outside. The building on the left, not a HUD project, it's just pictures of houses I liked. In Massachusetts, they're referred to as triple deckers or 3-deckers. That's a very regionalism. The site where I got it from refers to it as a triple decker. For a more national image, it might simply be a 3-family unit or 3-family unit house, one after the other down the street, or recently renovated, because they all look fairly new, but they're quite old houses. Are the colors important? Of the individual houses, perhaps not. Multicolored houses that have been recently renovated, and each house 3 families. If it were connected to the Census Bureau, this image, or to the archives where you're looking at census records, you might have a very different, if it's connected to the 1940 census, it might be $36 per month rent per family unit. Cartoons. And we're going from simple and basic to more complex. Is it just and the alt text, and you'll see it when you get the PowerPoint file afterwards, has a very detailed, long, it's a cartoon, and how do you convey that without just giving the text of it? In order to change the tire of a front car, the front tire of a car, you throw peanuts in the back to have the elephant tip the car. I'm not very good at humor. It's in there, but I would start off the alt text with, this is a cartoon that humorously depicts So explain what you want, set the audience up. This one, the picture on the right, a chicken pie in Jamaica costs £2. A chicken pie in Trinidad costs $2.40. A chicken pie in St. Kitts costs $2.15. These are the pirates of the Caribbean, the pirates. So what I would do is, even we as sighted people will see it last. I would flip it in the alt text. These are the pirates of the Caribbean, and then have the prices. Or does it work to have the prices first and then the punchline? Some of it might be, I've got to talk to a blind person and see how they would take this. Now, we have a real policy at the NIH. We don't depend on blind employees to do testing of other people's accessibility. They've got their own jobs to do, whether they're scientists or admin staff or researchers. So it's tough if you don't have a contract, or you don't an in-house contract for 508 compliance, or an outside contract where you can send things off and say, I need a blind person's professional opinion. And that one blind person represents one blind person. They may have a general sense more than we might as an individual who's sighted. Is the screen reader going to convey the punchline? These are the pirates of the Caribbean. Okay, person's either going to get it or they're not. We assume that cultural information is out there, that people will have seen the film or heard of the film, Pirates of the Caribbean, or the ride at Disneyland. It's going to succeed or fail based on any individual's prior knowledge. That they're blind or sighted is probably irrelevant. Do you use infographics here much? A lot of infographics, more and more. You could get into a lot of text, and sometimes that is the only way, and it's an adaptation. I'm not saying it's the best way. It's the best that I know of at the moment. Is just to provide the complete alternative, the text that's in the infographic as an alternative text or as a see text below. I don't know if this site where I got these two images intentionally did alternative text, or it's just they made it easier to read. I don't know if accessibility was what they had in mind. Tablespoon conversions and ounce conversions. These are great things to keep in the kitchen. I find them really useful. And what the alternative text is, see the text below, is what that site actually did. Do I have? Oh, it's in the field, in the notes field. But it goes through 1 tablespoon, 3 teaspoons equals 1 tablespoon. 1 tablespoon equals 1/4 of a cup. Does it need to indicate that there are 8 or 9 levels? Perhaps. I would probably use bullets or numbered, level 1, level 2, level 3. So again, just type up the same text that's already there, or you probably have the text that was used to create the infographic. Go back to the designer of the infographic. If it's short, you could put it into the alt text. If it's lengthy, then put it below the alt text. And the alt text would just say, tablespoon conversions. Equivalents are below for ease of reading. Trying to get to, where is that other, oh, here we go. Okay, so we've got comparing, we've got charts, we've got graphs, Venn diagrams. Venn diagrams can be very difficult to interpret and convey, but I imagine they're used here. Think of this as 2 slides, where I bring this one up second, the right-hand side. This is from Forbes magazine, and it's for $10, how many falafel sandwiches can you buy in each Middle Eastern country? Starting at 17 in parts of Palestine, you can get 17 sandwiches for $10. It has the flags of the countries. The flags are really nice. They add color. They're visual eye candy. I didn't put them in here into my equivalent chart, and it's just an Excel spreadsheet that I pasted into PowerPoint, and that's how I would convey the equivalent. I wouldn't put it all into the alt text. Certainly not as a table. You can't paste a table into an alt text. You could paste the text equivalent, but then it becomes very wordy and it's 20 lines long in the alt text. And do hit the hard return in the alt text field, whether it's PowerPoint or Word. I would just do, I don't know which is first. Probably the infographic is what you're presenting in your publication, in your digital content. And again, it may sound repetitive. See text below or see table to the right for text equivalent. If it's on another page, then just make the image also a clickable link. I probably should have put in outlines so that you can see the lines and the rows better. Would it make sense to put in the flags into the table? It's nice. I think it's a lot of extra tedious work. You could. Again, why shouldn't this be as much eye candy, have as much eye candy as the visual version? Blind or low vision individuals should have as much fluff in their reading as anyone else if it's meaningful, if it conveys a sense of lightness or impact. So that's an option. I kept it in the same order. Make sure that it reads down and then across and down, same here. There is no longer a cents key on the keyboard. So you have to just, it's all in dollars and cents. It's not adjusted for cost of living, so I don't know how accurate it is. Venn diagrams. Have you had any? Does it come up at all for you? Who has had it come up? How do you make it accessible? What have you done?
Well, I didn't do it personally. It was done prior to me, but we had to do it for, because I'm in OGC, and we had a case, so we had a FOIA request, and they had requested that we do it in a Venn diagram. But it didn't have any pictures in it. It was just more like a huge Excel PowerPoint. It didn't have any pictures in
Okay.
this particular one.
Yeah, usually a Venn diagram is 3 or more, or actually it could just be 2. 2 overlapping images, and then what's in the overlap? These are all the things I did wrong. These are all the things somebody else did wrong. The overlap is things that we both in common did wrong. We've got different diagrams. If you just Google Venn diagram images, you'll find all kinds of fun ones and serious ones. And then it's interesting to see if you can find the alternative text for it. The confluence or the overlap area is X. Is it important to say advance economic opportunity? Oh, in fact, this is a HUD image. Protect, this is the budget priority. Budget priorities for HUD are based on these 3 pillars. Advance economic opportunity, protect taxpayer funds, streamline operations. The meeting point of all 3 is how we make budget decisions, or what is the take-home message. If I read these 3 headlines, and actually because the 3 headlines are the same as what's in the image, it might not even be necessary to describe this, because the pillars, the budget priority of the agency are these 3 categories. You could put in the budget funds, the 3 prescription for HUD's 3 pillars as visualized to the right and described below. But the key to it is always not all the little minutia, but just the 3 categories are, our prioritization is the focal point, or is the overlapping of all 3. This is where it becomes very detail-oriented. 3 different disabilities or medical diagnoses: orthorexia, anorexia, and OCD. Depending on your target audience, if this is for individuals with one of those disabilities, if this is for family members, or if it's for healthcare providers. So again, how much information needs to be read into it? Probably going to get pretty complicated, more than those org charts. I would probably take it down to a level of The meeting place or the center, the overlap of orthorexia, anorexia, and OCD are the following, and just jump right into the take-home. Or I might do, again, bulleted, have all the symptoms for orthorexia, all the symptoms for anorexia. So it's going to be indented, level 1 or A, and then bullet A, B, C, D, level 2, A, B, C, D. So you'll repeat you'll have all of the ones that are repeated, because in fact the ones in the middle apply to orthorexia, they apply to anorexia, they apply to OCD. Some symptoms belong to 2 of the 3, and other symptoms belong to 2 different others. You'd use your bulleted list, 1, A, B, C, D. As you'll see, these are the symptoms that apply to all 3. Very detailed and long. So again, it's going to depend on, is it for parents or healthcare professionals, or is it for an patient who just needs to know, oh, if I have these overlapping, then I need to worry, or
I mean, I'm just confused about when you would not include all of that information. I mean, it seems like a lot of information, but it's not that hard to type that out. And
No.
so, I mean, and even if some readers might only want some of that information, there could be other people who
Would.
want all of it. And if no one wants all of it, then what's the purpose of having it written out for
exactly.
in the image?
I think the question is, what should be in the alt text and what can be separate from the alt text, so that they can pick and choose which to listen to. You're right, because why bother to put it there at all? And that's the question is, well, I bothered to put it there because I want people to know all the symptoms. I want the alt text to include everything. There's no one right or wrong answer. And again, we would have to go back to the content owner, the publisher, the writer, the person who's publishing the article. I want people to be concerned when they see this set in the middle of symptoms. Or I want parents to worry whenever they see any of these symptoms. I think it's more a question of how is it presented. Is some of it presented within the alternative text and formatting there? And is some of the content put just in the body of the page? The content that everybody sees and will read. So the person using the screen reader may hear some of it twice. They'll hear it in the article that is around the image, and then they'll hear just a condensed version in the alternative text. Or you'll skip an alternative text and just present it as categories 1, 2, and 3, or star, 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 and then bullet, bullet, bullet for the sub ones, if there's no priority. Anorexia and all of its symptoms, perhaps it's better off presented in a chart. And you have different levels of the chart or a table. It's simply, the example here is simply to suggest, why am I including so many details? And is it important? Have I thought through, before I give it to my desktop publisher, I want them to see that there are 10 symptoms. Maybe that's the take-home message. There are 5 that are common to all 3. I'll check it. I'll go back and re-question myself. Let's go through this, and then we'll take a break for a few minutes. Flow charts. Again, it's all about what is the context? What is it that you're trying to convey? Now, I'm still learning on the different shapes of flow charts, because I understand if they're round squares or rounded squares, oval-shaped versus parallelograms. The one unfortunate part, and I don't, scroll, if you would, Amelia, scroll over the image without clicking on it. See, I wish, and I don't know how to get around this. I've got to call Microsoft again. The link will pop up. I can see the link. I can't see the alternative text. I'd have to open up the PowerPoint to actually look at the coding for the alternative text. I wish Microsoft actually allowed me to scroll over and see the alternative text. But it's simply, This is a decision-making tree on which fruit to have. You start by having a goal of to obtain a piece of fruit. Your choices are A, B, C, D, or other. And eat the piece of fruit. I would summarize this all into one sentence. You know, I wouldn't even do it into a listing, you know, a bulleted list. You have a choice. A, apple, B, orange, C, peach, D, pear, E, other. I would just do a summary sentence. You have a choice of A, B, C, D, or other. Please pick one, and that's it. So that's the decision-making, that's the goal or the objective in this case. How to integrate 508 into an acquisition. This does take a lot of back and forth, and it would be a flow chart, a text-based alternative text. Your starting point is A. You then go to B. B may take you back to A. It will get very wordy, but if that's the basis for your decision-making, you know, if you get to a point where you have options of yes or no, yes will take you to this level, and then you reconsider. B, let's see. There are 6 stages in a decision-making for Section 508 and integrating it into your contract or your statement of work. Explain that there are at different points, and that depending on if you say point 6 is yes, then the arrow, what you'll put instead of the arrow into the alternative text is jump to point 7. So use some text. You're going to have to add text. It does become longer because this is a detail-oriented flow chart. If no, go back to stage 4. If yes, skip to stage 7. So you are going to actually have to explain it. Now again, hopefully whoever wrote this did it created the flow chart based on text and instructions. So you should be able to go back and get it from the original. This is if you don't have the text-based version. Step 1, you're presented with a new purchase request. That's position 1. Step 1, does it meet ICT, information and communication technology definition? If there's no technology involved, exit the process. If the purchase does have information technology, then it is bound by Section 508. Go to step 2. So you're adding instructions to substitute for the lines and for the directions of the lines. Go forward, go backwards, skip a step. Any questions? I feel like this is a little dry. And so hopefully during the break you'll give me some feedback. Let's take 5 minutes and we will start at 2:14, 15.